of the evening. So tonight's event is called Net Zero or Not Zero, Can We Debate Climate Change? And it's part of a series of Free Speech Union events that are exploring what I'm sort of thinking of as the new conformities. So we've got this event on climate change, something that increasingly people it's being demanded that they conform to a very narrow version of what we should think about when it comes to the environment. The next event is on race and identity politics, coinciding with the launch of Lord Tony Sewell's new book. And that is going to be an exploration of how the accusation of racism or being a racist, something being racist, which we know reaches extraordinary proportions, how that has become a way of kind of enforcing conformity. And then we've got an event in May, which is coinciding with Gareth Roberts' new book, which is on how LGBTQI++, etc., has become a force of conformity as well. So all of those things coming to a workplace near you, if you haven't already experienced them, I'm sure you already have, in civic life, in schools. Those are the kinds of mantras that people are being required to repeat. So, but this event, we're focusing obviously on climate change, but with a particular focus on the question of why it is that climate change kind of became a no debate issue, and what are the consequences have been of closing down debate in that way. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Ross Clark, and it's Ross's book that's the sort of foundation for this event. You may have read it already because it's been out for a while as a hardback, but it's just come out in paperback. So Ross's book is called Not Zero, How an Irrational Target Will Impoverish You, Help China, and Won't Even Save the Planet. So we'll find out what Ross's opinion is of net zero during the course of the evening, because I'm sure it'll be a surprise to you all. I've read it over the weekend, and it's really, really an excellent read. So if you haven't read it already, you can get a copy after we've finished the panel discussion, and Ross will also be signing copies. So let me tell you a little bit about Ross. So he's a prolific freelance journalist who's leader writer on The Spectator, as well as a columnist for The Telegraph, Daily Mail and Express. And he's the author of several books, including The Denial, a satirical climate change novel, which I think came out in 2020, and The War Against Cash, which sounds like the kinds of books that our audiences might be interested in. And then we'll hear from Harry Wilkinson. Harry is, he's in the middle here. Harry is head of policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation and its sister organisation, Net Zero Watch. He's also a policy advisor to Craig McKinley MP, who chairs the Net Zero Scrutiny Group in Parliament. Previously, he was a researcher to the late Nigel Lawson and has written for a number of publications, including CapEx, The Conservative Woman, Global Vision and 1828. And then at the end there, we have Austin Williams. And Austin is the director of the Future Cities Project. He's the author of several books, including China's Urban Revolution, Understanding Chinese Eco-Cities, Enemies of Progress, The Dangers of Sustainability, that's difficult to say, and co-author of The Lure of the City, From Slums to Suburbs. He's also the chair of Bookshop Barneys, which are in-person and online gatherings where they meet to discuss new books with authors, and has written for magazines as diverse as Nature, Wired, Top Gear, South China Morning Post, Metropolis, Times Literary Supplement, The Spectator and The Economist. So the way we're going to do it tonight, I haven't asked them to sort of prepare formal introductions because I had so many questions that came into my mind after I read Ross's book, that I thought I would ask each of them some questions first, and then they can discuss amongst the panel as well. And then obviously we'll have plenty of time to come out to the audience as well, as we always do. So if I can start with you, Ross, could you just explain to us what does net zero mean and where it came from?
Well, what it means is simply that we're supposed to, by 2050, reach carbon neutrality. So for every kilogram of carbon dioxide pumped into the air, another kilogram gets removed. That's the idea. And it is, of course, it's a very tortuous thing to do. It's not just about clean energy. You've got steel, you've got cement, you've got agriculture and these other very carbon-intensive industries which are extremely difficult to decarbonise. And this whole business of target for reaching net zero by 2050 was thrust upon us without even a debate, without a proper debate, without a vote in the House of Commons in 2019, and the dying days of Theresa May's government, if you remember her. And so it was, I think it was supposed to be her legacy. Well, I think it's a rather poisoned legacy, because it's something that was thrust upon us without any thought as how we were actually going to achieve it. When it went up to the House of Lords, they did actually have a vote there, and the Lords did pass an amendment. They said, well, where's your working? Where's your actual plan now to get to net zero by 2050? The government couldn't produce one, but the Lords don't try anyway. So we are lumbered with this rather hostage to fortune, which relies on all kinds of technologies magically coming into existence by 2050, and if they don't, well, we're pretty stuffed.
Ross, what is it that shapes your thinking on climate? I mean, why have you taken the position that you've taken? Is it just a kind of, did you come at it completely in a neutral way, and you just did the analysis, and then lo and behold, these are the conclusions you drew? Or presume this has been going on for a long time, and you've staked out a position for a long period of time. So what is it that shapes your thinking on it?
Well, I was interested in climate since I was 10 years old, and I'm old enough to remember when everybody was worried about a new ice age. There was a terribly cold winter in North America in 1977, and we had all these academic papers being produced then that, we're heading for a new ice age. We'd had a downward trend in temperatures for 30 years up until that point, and that was the feeling of many sort of climate scientists at the time. So I was interested then, of course, 10 years later, when the position was sort of starting to change and people were sort of starting to worry about global warming instead. I mean, I naturally had a bit of skepticism about it. But I said that that said that global temperatures are warming, and that probably has almost certainly got something to do with carbon emissions, other greenhouse gas emissions. But, frankly, what we hear from day to day on extreme weather is just sheer fantasy. The number of times I've heard people say on Radio 4 and other places, every time there's a storm, we're going to see more of this in future. We're getting more, violent weather, more violent storms. And that's actually completely contrary to the evidence. So, if you look at there's a publication, Status the Climate Report, published every year by the Meteorological Office and the Royal Meteorological Society, which goes through all the evidence, presents it all, and it quite clearly shows a downward trend in extreme wind speeds in Britain. And that's just one example of where the sort of conversation seems to have sort of rushed ahead and is actually contradicting the evidence. And, I find it extraordinary that, every time you sort of, if you have time after time when I hear it on the BBC, I bring it up with them. And the other side of it, of course, is that the practical, the policy. I mean, we can talk about the weather, we can talk about the climate, but what also matters is what we do about it, how you go about it. And, at the moment, we are headed, the current policy is extremely perverse and in danger of ruining our economy and deindustrializing Britain and Europe. And I don't know if anybody heard Jim Ratcliffe yesterday. The other day was at a conference in Antwerp in Belgium, where his company Ineos is trying to build a £4 billion plastics plant. He got a permit for it, and then the climate protesters got on to the Belgian authorities, and his permit was withdrawn. Not only that, the sort of bureaucracy he's had to go through. It was withdrawn, by the way, on the basis that nitrogen dioxide emissions might harm a nearby nature reserve. And as he pointed out, well, there are nitrogen dioxide emissions from his plant, but they are, in a year, it will emit about as much nitrogen dioxide as an average family barbecue. And, it's like Greenpeace and dioxins, the whole story again. As he said, at the moment, he's paying so much in carbon levies for his European plants. By 2030, it will have got to the stage where it will not be economical for him or any petrochemicals company to operate in Europe. They will simply go abroad because that's where they can make the profits. And I mean, if Europe sort of had some way of existing without plastics, without fossil fuels and so on, you say, oh, fine, we don't need them. But of course we don't. We haven't got to anything like that stage of technology. We're relying on fossil fuels for many decades to come. And if you're just going to push away the industry from Europe, then we're just going to be importing the stuff. We're exporting our carbon emissions and we're exporting the jobs and wealth with them. And of course, the whole net zero target, it has this inherent fault, which is that it is only a territorial-based emissions target. It refers to emissions which are physically spewed out within Britain or within Europe. And, it excludes the emissions that go out elsewhere in the world in the name of creating food and other products for UK and European consumers. So if you think it through, what Britain has done, what the rest of Europe has done, those countries which have adopted a net zero target, they've given themselves this very powerful, perverse incentive to offshore their emissions and offshore their industry and their jobs with it. And frankly, it just hasn't been thought through.
And do you think that's the real strategy?
Well, I don't think there is a clear strategy to it. I think it seems to me to be sort of, the whole policy seems to be sort of dictated to by climate protesters. The sort of, this whole net zero target, it was preceded, if you remember, in 2019 by Greta Thunberg and all those Extinction Rebellion protests in London, which blocked Oxford Circus for 2 weeks. I mean, you know what driving's like in London. You go into a bus lane, click, it's a £120 fine, isn't it? But you can take over Oxford Circus for 2 weeks and block off 50 bus routes, and that's just fine. And I don't know. I just do not know why Parliament, why every political party or all the main parties seem to be sort of so enthralled to the environmental protesters. Just beats me.
Harry, do you have any explanation why they're enthralled to the green lobby? Why it's been so successful?
Part of it has to be just the volume of climate-related messaging that I think we get from the government, that we get from popular social media figures, people like Greta Thunberg. People are reacting to that. I think when you look at the leaders of groups like Extinction Rebellion, like Roger Hallam, they have some quite extreme ideological beliefs. But the vast majority of the people are, I think, just feeling a sense that maybe the climate is changing faster than they're used to. Maybe we should be doing more to look after the environment, to look after wildlife. And that's an attractive kind of sell. People want to care more about the environment. And it's also a reflection of, where we are. We're a wealthy society. People are looking to right the various injustices. So there is a legitimate reasoning behind that. Where we don't have the proper debate is because people are frightened of speaking up. People are scared of being called a denier. And you look at the government's behaviour, they've made net zero a legally binding target. The law of the land is that net zero has to be met regardless of the cost. And that's really set the direction of travel. It enables all these public sector institutions to start pursuing it without really having a democratic conversation about, are these policies which have greater benefits than harms? None of the usual work that would happen in a democracy when policies were being discussed is happening because the target's already been set in law, and that's kick-started a whole range of activities that aren't getting the scrutiny that they should be.
But we were heading, I mean, before net zero became law, we were already very far down this road, weren't we?